Hey guys, it's Darwin. So, the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, which one's better and which one should you hike first? Now that I've done both the AT and the PCT, I tend to get the same questions all the time. Which trail is better? Which thru-hike did you have a better time on? What trail should I consider hiking first if I'm going to do my first long distance trail? Now, both trails are absolutely incredible and you couldn't really go wrong with either of them, but today I figured I would kind of break down the differences that I noticed on my hikes, and maybe it'll help you decide on which trail to hike first. Alright, so first a little bit of background. In 2015, I hiked the AT with my wife Snuggles. Now the plan was to go northbound from Georgia to Maine for 2,189.2 miles. We ended up hiking from the beginning at Springer Mountain to Great Barrington, Massachusetts, where I contracted a form of Lyme's disease and I broke a tooth. We had to get off the trail, and then in 2016 we returned to Great Barrington and hiked it to Katahdin, completing our journey. At the beginning of this year, in 2018, I solo thru-hiked the Pacific Crest Trail, hiking from Mexico to Canada for 2,652 miles. Now, on the AT, we were averaging between 15 and 20 mile days, and on the PCT, I was averaging between 20 and 30 mile days, and towards the end, 30 to 40 mile days. So now with all that out of the way, let's talk about some of the differences that I've noticed. First up, let's talk about difficulty. All the time I get questions asking me which trail I think was the hardest, which one wore me out the most, and which one is the most difficult. Now, in my opinion, I think the AT was definitely a harder trail than the PCT. And not just because it was my first trail, but just because it was overall a harder trail. Now, the AT has 515,000 feet of elevation gain and loss from Georgia to Maine, and the PCT has 315,000 feet of elevation and gain from Mexico to Canada. So statistically, the AT is a harder trail by 200,000 feet. Now, yes, the mountains may be bigger out on the west coast, with the highest elevation on the PCT going up past 13,000 feet, and the AT only going up just past 6,000 feet. However, the trail tends to go to the top of every single mountain on the AT, where on the PCT, it rarely ever goes to the top of mountains. Typically, on the PCT, the trail will kind of go up and then it'll skirt around the mountain, where on the AT, it's like a roller coaster. You go straight up to the top, straight back down to the bottom, and so on, all the way to Maine. The other thing to keep in mind are the Appalachians are older mountains. They have a lot more history and they've been weathered more. So the actual trail is full of rocks and roots, where the PCT is a pretty nice, gentle, graded trail. Now, a lot of that has to do with the AT being created as a footpath and the PCT being graded as an equestrian trail. The other thing that I think that makes the AT harder than the PCT is mentally. It is mentally a more challenging trail. Now, obviously that depends on who you are and kind of how you deal with things, but on the AT, you're dealing with weather like rain and fog and snow and cold and humidity a lot more than on the PCT. On my entire thru-hike of the PCT, I had fog maybe 1 or 2 days, and I only had rain 1 day, if you want to even really call it rain. The other thing that can mentally challenge you on the AT is the fact that you're in a green tunnel a lot, and you can't really see that far out in front of you or to the side of you because it's nothing but trees. Where out on the PCT, there's much more open space and less trees, so it's just more mentally stimulating. So again, in my opinion, I think the AT was definitely a harder trail, both physically and mentally. The next thing that I've noticed between the two trails that's totally different are the logistics. Now, in my opinion, the PCT takes the cake here, being a more logistically harder trail to hike. Now, what I mean by logistics is having to deal with longer water carries, longer times between resupply. You're farther away from towns and cities for hitching in. Timing is everything on the PCT. You want to make sure that you're out of the desert before it gets too hot. You want to make sure that you're in the Sierra when the snow's not too bad. And you want to make sure that you finish in Canada before the snow hits and the winter sets in. On the AT, it wasn't as logistically challenging. I mean, you do have some things that you have to worry about. Like, you definitely want to make sure that you get to Baxter State Park before October. But you definitely want to make sure that you get there before the end of October, because they do close it and then you can't finish. And then dealing with some permits in some national parks like the Smoky Mountains. But aside from that, it is a lot more forgiving and there's a lot more room for error. So again, I definitely think the PCT wins on this one. Now, the next big difference between both trails is community. You can ask anybody that's hiked both trails, there is much more of a community around the AT. From trail towns to hostels to outfitters to trail angels, there is definitely a big community that surrounds the AT. It goes through 14 states and comes really close to a lot of small towns, so there are more people out there that are willing to help hikers. Now, there's definitely plenty of that on the PCT, but you just don't get as much community as you do when you're out on the AT. On the Appalachian Trail, people tend to hike more together. They tend to move in packs or tramways, where on the PCT, you just don't see that as much. Now, I definitely did hike with other people on the PCT, but not as much as I did on the AT. So altogether, I think that the AT definitely has a stronger hiking community. And then the last big difference that I definitely want to talk about is feel. Now, what do I mean by feel? Well, no matter what trail you do, it has a certain feel to it. It has a certain life force to it. Now, neither of the trails really come out on top here, in my opinion, because they definitely both have a separate, individual feel to the hike. A different vibe, if you will. I felt like the AT was more rooted in history. They're older mountains. They go through older towns. There's a lot of historic plaques and battlefields. When I'm on the Appalachian Trail, I can't help to think about the people that have hiked before me and the people that have walked those steps before I have. I feel more connected to that trail. It feels like home. Now, a lot of that could have to do with it being my first trail and my first thru hike, so it always feels like home when I go back out to the East Coast. You just feel like you're in a different world, following one blaze after another, all the way to Maine, kind of like they're magnets. And the PCT, well, the PCT made me feel smaller. It's grander. There's grander views, and you're out in the middle of nowhere, and big, vast desert, and massive mountains. So you feel a lot smaller, and it just, I don't know, it feels like a bigger world, like you're hiking through the universe. And strangely enough, I felt less connected to the trail and more connected to myself. Now, without getting too weird and spiritual, I can definitely tell you that I enjoyed both of the trails and the feeling that both of them gave me. So which trail do I think would be the best first thru hike? If you had to pick one to do first, what would be the best for someone on their first go around? Well, I've said it in the past and I'll say it again. I think that the Appalachian Trail is a perfect first thru hike. Now, I know I just got done saying that it's harder mentally, it's harder physically, it's not as grandiose. However, there's a lot more room for error. There's a lot more of a community. So growing as a hiker and learning how to evolve in that world and how to exist on the trail, the Appalachian Trail is perfect for that. If you have a bad day, chances are there are a lot more people that you're going to be connected to where you can share those bad days with. If something goes wrong or you're tired or you're cold, you can easily get off the trail. If for some reason you mess up and you need something, there's more support out there. There's more trail angels that are around. Since there's more communities around, it's easier to get a hitch into town because they're used to hikers. Where out on the PCT, you're definitely kind of almost by yourself a lot. You're away from towns. You're in the middle of the desert, you're in the middle of the mountains. It's harder to get off the trail, and there's definitely less room for error, especially when you're talking about going up into the High Sierra and in the Northern Cascades. So in my opinion, the Appalachian Trail is the perfect first thru hike. And then to answer the big question that I get all the time, which trail do I think is better and which one do I like the most? I don't really like either of them any better than the other. I think they're both amazing. Every time I go out and do a thru hike, I do it for a different reason. I do it for a different experience. And both of those trails have given me totally two different experiences. So, yeah, it's kind of a cop-out answer, but I don't think one is better than the other. Alright, so again, all of that is my opinion, and you can hike the PCT first and have an amazing time on the AT and learn everything you need to know on the PCT, or you can do it the other way around. It's all up to you and what you think that you want from your first hike. So have you hiked both trails? Have you just hiked one? Which trail do you think's better? Which one do you think would be the perfect first through hike? Leave me something down below and let me know your thoughts. If you haven't had a chance yet, go over and check me out on Instagram. I've been posting a ton of new photos lately of some of the things that Snuggles and I have going on throughout the week, plus some pictures from some past hikes. If you found any value in this video, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.